Let's go through the overall structure of the academic essay. The text starts with a title, but this is tricky. My father, who was the chief editor of a large publishing house, told me that the last bit to finish is the title. He was right. We may name our child before birth, but if we decide to call him Sebastian and we find out that she is a girl, we better rename her. The title, together with the summary, introduction, and conclusion, needs to be finalized after you finish the research and you've wrote all the chapters. By then, you'll know what you actually wrote about. Writing, even academic writing, is creative activity. As you write, you may surprise yourself by coming up with new ideas. The title may be followed by a short summary of the whole paper. This will be also finalized after finishing your research, but start drafting it well before. This is important as most potential reader will check the summary to decide whether to open your text at all. If you do not invest time into this summary, how could you expect people to invest time in reading your study? By writing a hasty summary, you reduce your readership. The title or the summary is followed by the introduction. It presents to the reader the topic of your essay. You'll set out what your research is about, why it is significant, and how you are going to answer your research questions. In the what and why section, you'll explore what's written about the topic. This exploration is the literature review, which, in the case of a longer study, can either be a separate chapter or a part of the introduction. You describe the state of the field, that is, the existing studies, and you also give an account of the primary sources. Thus, you identify the works you'll build your research on, as well as the gaps and questionable statements in the existing studies. What remains unknown, unclear, or ununderstood? It is quite possible that while you write your research review, you will not just say what other scholars have not studied yet, but also what you disagree with in their work. To be critical is part of the job of a scholar. But when you criticize another scholar, try to do this in a polite way. As we have a dialectical mind, we tend to think in argument and counter-argument. Notice how often in free speech and in unstructured writing, we link ideas with but. The danger is that in writing a long text, building on and arguing against statements by other scholars, we can start to demonize them. Normally, these people are the closest to us in their interests, and in an informal setting, it have the most stimulating discussions. But in writing or in public debates, this is not always the case. We can make enemies of our potential collaborators, as well as of everyone who is linked to them, their family, friends, mentors, collaborators, and students. Also, as aggression stems from fear and frustration, often the strain to establish one's superiority demonstrates some complex of inferiority. Arrogant disrespect may reveal lack of trust and self-confidence. Judging others may give us the feeling of being strong, but real strength is manifested by the courage of admitting doubt. The more we trust ourselves and our interlocutors, the more we can share our doubts and work together. Think about scholars as your fellows in a common venture. We might compete for jobs and grants, but then we can also create jobs for each other and apply for grants together. Research questions fit into gaps or debates left open by the existing studies. Thus, by surveying the field and working on your literature review, you are likely to reshape your research questions. At undergraduate level, you are not required to produce new knowledge, although you are of course welcome to do so. Even at MA level, the minimal expectation is to explore and assess the research already produced. At PhD level, however, you have to add your own contribution to the field, and the good MA dissertation also achieves that. That leads us to the how. How shall I carry out my research? What theories and methodology shall I use? The theories indicate the way you will be thinking about the data you collect. The methodology describes your way to access, collect, and analyze the data. Thus, theories and methods are interconnected. They both should be shaped according to the topic and its sources. Don't forget, theories and methods are only tools. An exception is when the goal of your research is to test some theories or methods in a case study. However, while the what should define the how can also confine the what. The availability of data and time, as well as the limitation of your theories and methodology, will restrict your research. Indeed, it is very important to indicate these limits. As I learned from one of my mentors, Professor Madame Ulloa, no research can be exhaustive. The exception is when the scope of the research is perfectly defined, but this happens often during or after producing your research. Imagine that your research topic is an old castle. At some point, while mapping the castle, you'll think there are only 3 rooms left. You open the door to enter the first one and find out that it has 4 doors. Or, back to our aquatic examples, think about the infinite task of mapping the intricacy of a whole unknown river system. As everything is connected to everything, research will never end unless you mark its limits. If you know the object of your study very well, then you can do that at the beginning. But if your research is an exploration of the unknown, both its topic and limitations will be redefined while working on it. That's why your introduction, title, and summary will be concluded together with your conclusion. Indeed, to fulfill the aesthetics of academic essay writing, your introduction and conclusion should be possible to read as a continuous text, skipping the detailed study in the middle. The conclusions will reply to the questions set out in the introduction and will lead to new questions. Remember, in the case of research papers, many or even most readers will check only the summary, the table of contents, and then, if interesting for them, the conclusion or the introduction and the conclusion, and maybe some specific chapters, sections that are relevant for their own research. The introduction will be followed by the detailed study. This is the longest section of your text, but its general structure needs less discussion here. As a guideline, the longer the study, the more headings you need. Even in the case of a short essay, it's useful to have clear sections, possibly with titles. A long study, such as a dissertation, must consist of chapters. These have to be meaningful units, each with a title, introduction, and conclusion. These introductions and conclusions have the additional function of linking the chapter to the previous and following ones. The last chapter of the essay is its conclusion. It replies to the questions set out in the introduction and summarizes the following. What we have learned from this research and where does it lead? What did it add to the state of the field? What are the most important results? Why are these results relevant? And what new questions this study opens? To sum up, you may start your research with a large topic in mind, but you will narrow it down to questions you can say something new about. This does not mean, however, that your research has to be narrow-minded. Everything you study will feed into it somehow, and its conclusions will be relevant for others working on related or even seemingly unrelated topics. If you look at the overall structure of your study, it's useful to start with an overview of the big picture. Zoom in for a detailed case study, and zoom out to the big picture again at the end. Thus, the reader will understand the context and why your study is important.